Hola Mark, ¿cómo estás? Here I am in Spain and I want to give you a quick presentation on Victorinox and an expansion opportunity that I've seen within the company. Alright, a quick overview. Today I just want to go over the main issue quickly, Porter's 5 forces very quickly, my own metric-based market analysis. I'm going to skip through the value chain because I have a lot of content there, but I'll explain why. And then later we'll get to my evaluation and my recommendations and implementation plan. Okay, starting off, we all know the main issue here. Our CEO, Carl Elsner, he's having trouble deciding on whether or not to sell the fragrances that he's been given in this new acquisition of Wenger SA. And he could sell the fragrances, he could rebrand the fragrances, or he could use his existing brand called Swiss Army and he could sell under that brand. So going quickly over Porter's 5 forces, I want to start with the threats of substitution. So right away, when you think of fragrances, you understand that it's very likely that consumers will go and substitute the product, right? It's a cheap, low-cost product. There are millions out there. And so the problem is, these things exist. Consumers will go on and purchase substitutes if needed. Overall, the threat is very high. Threat of new entrants. Now this one I've evaluated as more moderate. There are pros and cons. It's difficult to establish relationships with suppliers, yet the barriers of entry are fairly high for smaller companies. Now, overall, I have to say, it's a fairly moderate landscape. Now, the overall degree of rivalry, it's going to be very high. You have brand recognition, loyalty among young consumers, that's growing quickly. You have perfumes that can be sold in many stores, distributed through any sort of chain. And so it's easy for players to be present in all sorts of arenas. Overall, the degree of rivalry is definitely going to be high. Supplier power. Now, if you think about it, with the fluctuating components of what go into a fragrance, the fluctuating price rather, the supplier power is going to be very high. They're always going to have you at the mercy of what the prices are for these components. Lastly, buyer power. Same type of deal. Buyer power is going to be high. The demand that the youth create for this product is growing. And therefore, with their brand loyalty, their choices and selectivity is also becoming more defined. They're more likely to stick with the brand that they know well. So it's going to be difficult to get those buyers to switch to a new brand. A brief marketing examination. So in US dollars, the global market for perfume is $23.5 billion. All right, now Wenger, they last had revenues of $9 million US dollars in their last year of operation. So for Victorinox, this represents 3% of the company's yearly revenues. So essentially, why discard those revenues? If you're Victorinox and you're making $300 million a year, then 3% of those revenues is quite high. So without any reasonable explanation to think that you're sacrificing profitability, why not sell this perfume? It's going to make you money. So here's where I get to the value chain. You'll see if you look through my presentation that I've got a pretty, a formulated method for viewing this. So I'm just going to skip through it, but you can see that the asterisks, they represent kind of this correlation with an activity that creates value for the company. So the more asterisks, the more correlation, essentially. Now, getting finally to Porter's 16 strategies, I've defined 2 strategies and I will suggest one of my own as an alternative. Differentiation and horizontal expansion. This is going to be a good choice because You're going to be able to grow in a very saturated market if you choose this. The horizontal expansion component, that talks about acquiring other things, other companies rather, that are already in the fragrance market in a similar position to Wenger. And I estimate that approximately every 2 years, with continual growth, you can buy more of these companies. Next, differentiation and capacity expansion. This is an option that would incorporate targeting certain groups of buyers. Now, the only downside to this is that it's going to be very costly. It would, however, increase the growth faster, and you'd become a larger player in the fragrance industry much sooner. Now, lastly, because Victorinox represents Swiss Army brand, and it's a very precision-based, functionality-based type brand, you're definitely gonna have you're definitely gonna have a disconnect there, you know. So if you brand under Swiss Army, it might not make sense to sell a perfume. So this is definitely a valid option. Take the money and run. Now, my recommendation, finally, is that they go with a differentiation and horizontal expansion strategy. Now, I suggest this because it's a reasonably priced strategy. It's going to encourage their growth, and there's no reason to think that it's not going to be profitable for them. The implementation essentially says just that. Every 2 years, they should expect to be able to purchase more of these small companies and expand at a growth rate that matches that of the natural marketplace. Now, this will help them essentially avoid a situation like Wenger's. If they diversify, they won't have their eggs in one basket, and they'll be able to sustain themselves through any sort of market crash, economic downturn, all of these sorts of things. That's it for my presentation today, Mark. I hope you enjoyed it. I thank you so much for listening. Have a nice evening.